The best and worst among us. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today in these quarantine times is Garrick Ross. How's it going, Garrick?
It's going. We'll just leave it at it's going.
And of course, Christopher Hopkins, our assistant producer, and Adam Coutura, our producer. So this podcast is called The Best and Worst Among Us. It's a special podcast. We don't have a dumbest bill on this podcast because of all of the protesting and the rioting that is occurring nationwide. We're doing this special podcast to get the unique millennial perspective and boomer perspective of what it is that we're seeing. And if we can actually talk about this in a way that's civil and intelligent and try to get to some, point where maybe those folks who listen can help us out here to try to get to common ground. So as everybody knows, George Floyd was clearly murdered by a police officer. And of course, the way our system works, you were charged with a crime.
And then you go through the trial and
you're arrested and arraigned and so forth. And after that you have a trial, and there's a lot of obviously investigating that occurs to make sure as to what happened. But look, it's on video. It's on video.
Yeah, and it's pretty night and day there.
And there are 3 officers who stood by. I don't think they have been charged yet. They've been interviewed, I believe. I'm sure they had their attorneys present, but they stood by and watched.
I wouldn't doubt if we see them charged with something.
It seems like they
in some kind of culpability.
It seems like they should, because how do you stand by and watch someone with their knee on someone's neck for I think 9 minutes?
Yeah,
and
I mean,
that's okay.
From all the reactions that I've seen from a lot of police chiefs across the country, I think they're. The idea is, well, one, what was he doing, the cop? I mean, that is just outside of any realm of moves they teach you. But 2, what are the 3 cops standing around for? And
why are they there? And why are they watching as this African-American gentleman, Mr. Floyd, is pleading for his life? He's already in handcuffs. He's laying face down on the street while the police officer's knee is on his neck. And it appeared that the police officer's entire weight was, on his knee and on his neck, which clearly it had to have been because the gentleman couldn't breathe.
Yeah, I read the autopsy. That was something that made big headlines when it came out, and it said that, he didn't die of asphyxiation or a lack of oxygen. He died from, an underlying heart condition or, something that happened as a result. But it's pretty evident that, that officer's actions triggered those events.
Absolutely.
And that George Floyd would still be here with us today if it wasn't for that.
The way that particular thing went down. And of course, we should say that I think George Floyd was trying to pass a $20 bill that was fake, and so it was a nonviolent crime. It was a crime, but it was a nonviolent crime.
Yeah, I mean,
and so to treat, it's not like the guy. At least there was no other video that I saw where George Floyd was resisting.
He wasn't. He was laying down on the ground. He was handcuffed. There was no reason for anything that happened that day to have happened the way that it did.
I completely agree.
And as somebody who really does believe that each of us should have the maximum amount of rights and maximum freedom in this country, I think it disturbs me a lot, because here's a man who arbitrarily had his basic human right to life exterminated for no reason other than incompetency.
Yep, absolutely. And look, this podcast is entitled The Best and Worst Among Us. And I got that from Dinesh D'Souza, who tweeted, "If you want to see what humans are at the best and are capable of, watch the SpaceX launch. And if you want to see humans at their worst, watch the Antifa terrorists smash and burn the businesses that others work so hard to build." And that's really where we're going with this podcast today, because we're going to start out with the fact that a gentleman was killed, and he was murdered by a police officer, and three police officers stood by and watched and did nothing. And naturally, there's enormous anger in the community in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so you would think that what would happen is there would be protests. That would certainly be understandable. But they very quickly turned into riots. I want to make this very clear. Not all people were rioting. Some people were there clearly to protest. And then the protests and then the riots have gone nationwide in most American major cities, and they've gotten completely out of hand as they look a lot more like rioting, because stores are smashed, people are going into the stores, they're stealing things, buildings are being burned, and
there is no law and order It is
No.
extreme civil unrest, and it's an interesting story nationwide where people come out and they peacefully protest during the day, but then 6:30, 7 o'clock rolls in and the curfew happens, and those peaceful protesters go home, and some other crowd comes in, and then the night kicks off, and it's rioting and clashing with police, and tensions are really high, and it is in my life. I'm 22.
You've never seen anything like this, have
I've
you?
never seen anything like this. I can remember watching the Ferguson riots, and I was, a year removed from coming to Baltimore when the Freddie Gray riots in Baltimore happened, and those were at the time really big events and things that really had an impact on young people watching the news, but none of those events have to the same degree the national attention or national implications that this movement does.
Because video camera, the video phone,
and it's
the
everywhere.
Camera, it's everywhere.
Every city, it's every town in America is having some kind of event going on in it.
And here's what's important about this conversation that we're having on Mark and the Millennials. We're talking about not just the generalities of stores that have been looted and broken into, but the fact that there are all different kinds of groups that are involved in the protests as well as the riots with all kinds of different grievances.
Yeah.
And so there are domestic terrorists, clearly they're involved.
That are using
like
this
Antifa.
that are using this as a
recruiting tool and an opportunity to riot.
Yeah.
There are revolutionary communists, and some of them are actually being funded, at least there are reports of being funded by, if not Russia, then certainly China. And then there are US-based radical Islamist organizations. Let me say that again. There are radical-based Islamic organizations, and they're US-based, and some of these people, or if not most of them, are US citizens who don't like Western culture or Western civilization. And they have joined together, these groups, more or less, we're going to call it joined, and they're protesting in some cases. And in other cases, without question, they're rioting and inciting violence. And all of these groups have one thing in common. They support the Democrat Party. And now that's going to be very controversial. You might say, well, how do you know they support the Democrat Party? I can tell you one thing. They don't support the Republican Party.
Yeah, but I don't even think they think that the Democratic Party is the answer. I don't think any of those groups wake up and say that Joe Biden is the ultimate, candidate that they've been striving for. I think, what they want to do is push.
By any of those groups, you're not lumping in the legitimate concerns of the African American community.
And that's what bothers me the most.
Yes.
Is, I think
everybody generalizes.
As a millennial, I think that my generation, and even though I identify as a conservative, that we're a lot more open to the idea of race relations in the United States and how they are, and subjects like police brutality, and that we do believe genuinely that there is an issue in the way that the police interact with the community, especially
some police.
Yeah, some police. Yeah,
there are.
Yeah. Take everything I say with a lack of broad generality. Like I'm talking about the people like the officer whose name I won't say because he doesn't deserve to have his name said. But things like that, and when you see all of this going on, I think it taints the good effort that a lot of people in minority communities are trying to interact with their police organizations and their leaders to enact some kind of valuable and valid change that can increase their standing as well as their perceptions.
This is an important conversation because when I say these are all groups that are related to the Democrat Party, I'm talking about the domestic terrorists, the revolutionary communists, and the Islamist organizations. That's what I'm talking about. In the African American community, there's a lot more diversity of thought than they get credit for, quite frankly, because there are so many people that live in the African American community. Look, where I'm from originally is Baltimore, right? In Baltimore, the African American community clearly just doesn't have opportunity.
Yeah.
And the opportunity that they lack has not gotten better under 50 years of unabated Democrat control of every single office in Baltimore.
One of the videos that I saw that's been going viral is former NBA player Steven Jackson was I believe he knew George Floyd, and he was giving a speech, and it's been making the rounds. And one of the things that he said is, he was a lucky man because he had opportunity, but people in our community don't have opportunity.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
And some of the things that you see here are a direct result of that.
It's
a lot
true.
of frustrations, and this isn't something that.
Don't forget the quarantine either.
Yeah, I mean,
we're in a pandemic,
opportunity.
so opportunity is evaporating in front of you.
Yeah.
So you're already cooped up.
40
you're already
million
angry.
Americans are unemployed.
You don't need a lot of reason to go out and start protesting. Unfortunately, there are individuals who are using this as an opportunity to incite violence and create violence, and some of them are legitimately thugs, by the way, and they have nothing, they could care less about the African American or the black cause, if you will, of more opportunity.
They see an
and more
opportunity
freedom.
to riot, and they're just taking it because they're
others do care.
privileged, and they know that at the end of the day they can go home, and burning down this community has no impact on their life at all.
And so Joe Biden, he visited with Black Lives Matter in Wilmington, Delaware, and there were at least 13 Biden staffers who have made donations to radical leftist groups. And I'm not talking about Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about lots of other leftist groups that the staffers that work for Biden have raised money to get them out of jail. And these are individuals who have looted and rioted, not protested, obviously. And these are Biden staffers that have done this. And so it's interesting. So we hear on the one hand that the President of the United States hasn't said enough about this incident in a statesmanship manner. Quite frankly, I actually believe that's true. But you know who else hasn't? Is Joe Biden.
Yeah, he's been very quiet.
He's been incredibly quiet.
It is really interesting that in a time where I think America is desperately begging for leadership.
They really are.
And for somebody to be a voice in the dark and in a light at the end of the tunnel, we're not getting that from either of them. And it's a shame. And
Biden staffer, well put, Biden staffers have given money to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which has raised $20 million in 1 week. And their purpose, the Minnesota Freedom Fund's purpose, is to let out violent offenders who were arrested from Antifa and other organizations that have incited violence or looted, which of course is why they were arrested to begin with. And so I'm just trying to figure out how does that, what is the teaching moment here, right? What is the teaching moment? Because the teaching moment we could ask on both sides. What is the teaching moment for the officers who committed this murder? The teaching moment is hopefully they're going to be going to prison.
Yes.
And I believe that they will.
Yeah.
But what is the teaching moment of the individuals who really don't care about what is happening in America? They have no stake in America whatsoever, so they've decided that they're going to go rob, burn, and pillage communities. What is the teaching moment if they're just let out of prison? Let out of jail, I'm talking about, because they were bailed out, and there's no there's at least make them pay back what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these places, when I see these bail funds, I think that for people who are, peacefully protesting and they stand in a place and the police come and arrest them for peacefully protesting, I think that a bail fund, to bail those people out on, civil disobedience charges is probably necessary. But when you talk about bailing out people who are, who aren't fighting that fight, who aren't trying to bring attention to issues and grievances that are, longstanding in these communities, I think it's just enabling a cyclical cycle of outrage and distress.
So
here's the thing that really, because these people are going to go back into the community, right? Mm-hmm. That are burning and looting and things like that, and they're going to continue.
Some of them are, because some of them aren't from the community, to be fair.
Yeah, but they're going to go back to where they were before, even if they got arrested there.
Correct.
So we have a incident where there's a national movement because of an incident involving officers. And then now these officers have to respond to the civil disobedience going on. But on top of that, you have riots and you have, looting, burning, and all those extracurricular activities that aren't within the normal grounds of protesting. And it's creating this, this rampant festering cycle where, the police have to interact with the community in ways that are aggressive, and then these protesters, and then and the people going above and beyond that are now.
It's a small number of people, though, by
that are that making the whole thing just seem like it's swelling up and being it's engulfing the.
So I just want to say this about
the
Minnesota Freedom Fund that I mentioned before, that has raised $20 million and 13 Biden staffers have given to it. right? Why don't they use that $20 million to rebuild those African-American owned businesses that were burned down and looted?
Yeah.
Rather than letting the people out and giving them money for bail, the people who actually caused the looting and caused the burning down of their businesses or the destruction of their businesses.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Where is the teaching moment here? And that's why the Biden campaign is no better in my mind than what the President of the United States has done. And because the President of the United States really hasn't spoken in a statesmanship way and in an eloquent way to try to rise above this and tell us that we are better than this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh man.
Millennials. What's the millennials? Look, that's my boomer perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder.
I think teaching moments are important, and I think one of the teaching moments when it comes to the police officers, I think generally speaking, and I think this extends to both the president and the Biden campaign, is that where is generally speaking the accountability? I think the generation older than me and the generation older than that one have made a system where there is an overall lack of accountability in bad conduct. Whether you're a police officer, whether you're a government official,
sure.
That officer who did these things, and even the people who get charged, who not get charged, but even the people who do the protesting and things like that, but not the regular protesting. I'm talking like, the rioting, the looting, et cetera.
The people that are doing the rioting.
There is a general lack of accountability across America in a lot of facets of how we handle things, So that officer who killed George Floyd, he had 11 prior police complaints filed against him. That is, to me, unacceptable. Mm-hmm. That any man could have 11 personal conduct charges levied against him in his own professional career. In private business, you would never see anything like that, where people are held accountable for their actions. But in government, and in our hero institutions, which is another topic I think we should talk about, later on in this discussion, people don't get fired. They get reassigned to a desk for a week and then they get back out there on the next week. And
right.
And there was no accountability for the people who oversaw this officer. I mean,
no teaching moment, no accountability.
A woman lobbying to be the next vice president of the United States, while being the Minnesota Attorney General, had a case from this man's conduct on her desk, and she declined to do anything.
Mm-hmm. And that person is now...
That is Amy Klobuchar.
Who's the United States Senator who was very likely to be chosen.
That she gets chosen now.
Likely at one time, but not now.
And for good reason, because it's inexcusable from your leader to let people like that go unchecked.
So get this, podcast listeners. So Leland Vittert, he's a reporter for Fox News. He was in downtown Washington, D.C.
Yes. In
front of the White House. Now, the chances are, if you live in America, at some point in your lifetime, you've probably come to Washington, D.C., maybe even on a field trip.
I go once a year.
With your high school class. Maybe that's when it happened. But you came to Washington, D.C., you saw the monuments, and you also saw the White House. By that, I mean you walked outside the White House, outside the gates. Well, there was a protest that started there. Protest, by the way. Peaceful protest.
Yes.
And there was a lot of course, yelling and so forth, which you would expect during a protest, but it was peaceful. And then Leland Vittert of Fox News, who was reporting in the middle of this protest, was spotted by a protester, and the protester having been somewhat informed that, hey, that is a Fox News reporter. I've seen him before. And then he yells at everybody, all of his friends, hey, that's a Fox News reporter. Let's get him.
Yeah.
So they chase him. They chase him, and Leland Vittert basically, had to run for his life because some of the so-called peaceful protesters, not all, some of them decided to cross the line. And that's the danger when you get a lot of people together in a group, is someone always wants to be, it seems like there's always that one person who wants to, and this is what bothers me like crazy about millennials. They always have their phones out. And it's like, why aren't you at least protesting for the moment? Why do you need to have your phone out?
Yeah.
You either believe what you're doing, and that should satisfy you, that you're doing the right thing. Why in the world do you need to have your phone out to let the whole world know that you're so virtuous? I don't care that you're virtuous. You should care that you're virtuous. And that is the thing that drives me crazy about millennials, and I'll ask you about that in a minute. But first, let's hear Leland Vittert. Here's the clip of him talking about this escapade. Here it is.
A mob descended on us, chased us out, of Lafayette Park there. There were 50 or 60 people who no longer cared about the Secret Service or yelling epithet at President Trump or talking about that. They came out after us, chased us out, took our camera, smashed our camera, took my microphone, threw it at me. We took a lot of body shots in terms of getting pushed around and shoved around, and then finally made our way about 2 blocks to where we could find a police cruiser, and then the police there called in reinforcements. It was the most scared I have been since being chased out of Tahrir Square by a group from the Muslim Brotherhood.
So that's Leland Vittert talking about it's the most afraid he's ever been since being chased by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt when he was reporting there. So to the millennials in the room, we've got Chris Hopkins, our assistant producer, but also Garrick here with Mark and the Millennials. And the question is, why is it so important that people have to make the news? These protesters, some of them decided to make the news, immediately whip out their phones and say, well, you got Fox News here reporting, let's beat the living you-know-what out of these people, maybe worse, maybe even kill them, and let's chase them down. Why is it that everybody has to broadcast themselves? If they really care about the issue, why is it that they have to let everybody know that they care about the issue?
Oh,
from the millennial perspective.
Loaded because
it is, I know.
There's a lot of different, competing viewpoints here. So to break a few of them down for you, of course, there's the people who just want to seem virtuous and display their virtue for everybody to see.
They're the egotistical people.
Yeah,
those are the they love themselves.
There's legitimate tactics as to why people pull things out. They want to document the things going on in the event that something that they view as bad happens to them. But also a lot of it is just I think a good portion of it is we're just living in a moment of history right now. And I'm not saying that there's, I think a bit of this is an apples to oranges comparison, but when you look at times in history where there's been these giant protests that have made history and that are always frequently talked about, look at Tiananmen Square. A lot of what we know from there is from people who brought cameras and documented all the things going on. And so, my generation particularly, I have anything better than you had growing up and a whole lot more in this little
That's a fact.
2x4 device here. And so...
But I think this little device here, this phone, cell phone.
Oh, it has unintended consequences.
I think it enables millennials in particular, but everybody, to be fair, to do things that they normally would never do because they are so all about themselves and they're so self-centered that they have to get the phone out and show, as you said, not just how virtuous they are because they're there protesting and maybe even rioting, but also just how cool they are because, they're with the cool crowd. And I got news for you. You know why this crowd isn't cool in Washington, D.C.? Not just because of what they did to a Fox News reporter, Leland Vittert, but they went to the Lincoln Memorial and defaced the front of the Lincoln Memorial and spray painted, "Y'all tired yet."
And the
World
War II memorial.
That's Antifa. And go ahead, the World War II memorial was also defaced.
I've seen a lot of what's the word? Incidental casualties, or not casualties, but people, things caught in the crossfire that it kind of leaves me scratching my head. Now, do I think that it's people necessarily understand what they're doing when they go up to these things and do this? Probably not, but I saw there was an Armenian genocide memorial in Minnesota or Denver, it was in Denver.
Okay.
That was defaced with, graffiti, and it's just,
why?
I don't understand why.
Yeah, well, and I bet you the idiots that did that don't understand why either, because we don't teach history. We certainly don't teach American history. We don't teach world history in K to 12. I'm talking about it's just people graduate and they're completely illiterate about history.
Yeah.
Had they actually understood about history, look, there's no better way to lose the entire country over what happened to this gentleman in Minnesota, the murder of this gentleman. There's no better way to lose the entire country than to deface the World War II memorial or the Lincoln Memorial. Can you imagine?
It's a shame because
the guy who ended slavery as we know it and saved the country, they decide to go to that memorial of all memorials?
And to me, it's a shame because we led off the show saying that essentially there's been universal condemnation for the actions of the man who killed George Floyd. And I think if you were somebody who really did want to see police reform in this country, there was no better time to do it than now. I mean, you finally had an event where even, the staunchest of conservatives who are very reluctant to label any foul doing on police behalf saw this and was like, I can't come up with anything. And here we are.
I don't think conservatives. Well, look, I'll speak for myself. I certainly don't look for reasons to. I try to look for the truth, right?
Yeah.
And there's no doubt of what we saw is what we saw, but there's also no doubt that in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, there's a problem. There's probably a systemic problem, but the systemic problem is not necessarily the fact that every officer is this way, but that
it's the lack of accountability.
There's no accountability,
yeah.
Right? And so they're not cleansing the system by getting rid of bad cops.
Bad cops, and this is a system. Like, look, we talk about education a lot on the show, and one of the comparisons I've seen is like, when there's teachers that are bad, they kind of stay in the system and you can get away with it. But when you're talking about people who wield force and police you and are supposed to uphold and protect your rights, you can't have bad apples. You can't have people that just hang out and that are, just bad at their job, because things like this happen. And
they do.
And it spirals out of control. And this is why there needs to be a return to accountability. If you're bad at your job, you should get fired. You should be disciplined across the board. Politicians and the like, who have for time and time again just kind of stuck their head in the sand when it comes to holding people accountable for bad discretions and things like that because of political expediency.
So in Raleigh, so hold on a second. So in Raleigh, North Carolina, the police chief in Raleigh, North Carolina, said that she will not put officers in harm's way to protect property, protect property. So if you have a store or a building of any kind in downtown Raleigh, the police chief, a woman, says that she will not protect your property because she doesn't want to put police officers in harm's way to protect your property. And here is the confusing message that I'm getting. The confusing message is we've got a police officer and officers who committed murder in Minneapolis. And then we have, in Raleigh, North Carolina, an African-American police woman who is the chief, who is saying it's okay to destroy property. How is it so that one person commits a heinous crime, murder, and yet it's okay to burn maybe an entire city because they're not going to...
See, I don't think she's saying that it's okay to loot property. I think what we're seeing is a situation where...
Well, we have a clip on it. You want to hear the clip before you comment?
Sure.
Here's the clip. You got to listen to this.
Systemic racism. There were several incidents, including an incident that happened in a park in New York. That was nothing but systemic racism. So when we look in the mirror and we talk about racism, it's not just the law enforcement side of it. It's embodied in the greater community, and we all have to own that as well.
So she is actually opining about it. Remember, her job is she is a police officer. She's the chief. Her job is to enforce. She's law enforcement. She is there to enforce the law. Yeah. And instead, she's opining and providing, the fact that there's systemic racism, and she's talking about this. I'm not really sure how that is appropriate for a police officer rather than just say, hey, look, this happened. It happened in Minnesota. It's not going to happen in my town. I'm a police chief. I am a woman and I'm black. And there's no way I'm going to let this department commit such a heinous crime as that department. My department's under control. So therefore, I want to tell the community, this is not the place where you want to loot and burn and pillage. You're not going to do it. And I'm not going to put up with it. Instead, she opened the door and basically said, I'm not going to get in your way if you decide to do it.
I think a lot of this, though, is the fact that the police departments don't have the numbers or the personnel to be able to combat the sheer numbers of people and all the different, events that are going on. So one thing that I take away from this is you're going to see probably a lot of people realize that when you need it most, the government isn't going to be there for you. If you're a business owner, if you're just a person in a community,
who stops people from coming into your business and burning it or looting it and basically robbing you blind.
People who can protect themselves.
You do if you have a gun.
Yeah.
And if you've got a family and if you've got
You're
friends
gonna
with a
see a
gun,
lot of people
stand right outside your business
in a
with
lot
your
of communities with guns now.
Let's clarify too, at Mark and the Millennials, we're talking about you are a law-abiding gun owner.
Yeah.
You own the gun legally, and you're standing outside your store protecting it. Let me tell you something. If the police chief where I lived, which he would not do, by the way, but if the police chief where I live said, I'm not going to protect property, so therefore the chances of you getting looted are really high or your business getting looted and burned down, I'd be there with my family standing outside and I'd be armed because I can't afford to lose everything. What? I mean, what? I had nothing to do with what happened, okay?
Yeah.
In fact, I'm that guy that's been trying to solve it through school choice for years.
Yeah.
And get turned down by the Democrat Party constantly by trying to give people an opportunity to go to a better school.
Right. I have a question for you,
Yes.
I guess. One of the things that's been going on that I've seen a lot of is, and I think it's similar to the police chief's comments, is you've seen a lot of sheriffs, police chiefs, across the country in a lot of cities actually march with the protesters, converse with them, talk about them. I've seen videos here in Baltimore of it, one instance in Flint, Michigan. What do you, as somebody who, from your comments based on how you should be upholding the law, how do you view those kinds of inaction?
You mean when police officers walk with people?
Yeah, they walk with people, they talk with them, they're protesting, locking arms and things like that.
That's community policing.
Right.
I mean, really, I see that as community policing because what you're doing is you're showing the protesters that you were there to protect.
Right.
You're also there to understand the fact that what had happened was inappropriate and you want to help keep things peaceful and as a protest. And let's be clear what a protest is. A protest means that you're walking around, you've got a sign, and maybe you're yelling out some sort of slogan, or maybe you're just trying to hold that sign and have the media pan the sign to demonstrate that you care and solidarity in numbers.
Right.
Obviously, with police officers being part of that and actually trying to embed themselves into that group, they're community policing. But when you cross the line, as we all know, when you're rioting, it's a little bit different. You're probably running, and you're probably throwing. In some cases, look, we'll just go right to this. In Manhattan, there is a lawyer. He's an Ivy-educated lawyer, and he's also a community board member in Manhattan. And he was arrested because he was accused by the police in Manhattan of throwing a Molotov cocktail at a NYPD police car. Now, this gentleman is African American, and think about this. He's an Ivy League graduate, and then he went to Fordham Law School after that. And he's driving around in his car. Obviously, it's on video, and someone has the video. We don't have it yet, but I guarantee in New York there are cameras everywhere, so this is on video. And he throws the Molotov cocktail at an NYPD cruiser. And if you've ever seen one of these cruisers in any community, you really can't see inside, so you don't know if someone's inside or not.
Yeah.
So they arrested him, and this guy has an incredibly great job with a Mark Hay law firm in downtown Manhattan, a great education. He's had all the advantages in life. What was he thinking? This is an example.
It's a shame because I see somebody like that and I think that, they're in a great position to make the change that they want through the system because they're excelling in it. He is an Ivy League educated and, great law school at Fordham, and it's just the tools are there, and, He's probably, well-read, obviously smart, and he could have given a speech. Instead, he could have been there with the protesters and talking about peaceful protests, talking about MLK, and there is a desperate need for leadership.
Oh, that's a fact.
And somebody to be a leader in a lot of these communities, but also nationally and in legislatures and things. And I would love to see people work for that end.
I agree.
To step up and really take this whole thing by the horns and guide it somewhere good.
Completely agree. And so one person that didn't do that is good old Mayor de Blasio.
Bill de Blasio, it sucks.
Mayor de Blasio.
We've never talked about him enough on this show.
So Mayor de Blasio, you ready for this, podcast listeners? His daughter Kira was arrested during the protests.
Talk about two totally different people there.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill's done everything in his mind to do some kind of mental gymnastics to, I don't even know what he's trying to validate or not validate, and
With respect to what? What do you mean?
Just in general. I mean, during this time, he has been an incompetent leader.
But an awful mayor.
An awful mayor when it comes to,
managing the pandemic.
Throws the police under the bus, but then he says they're doing a good job, and it's so hard to. He says a lot, but he doesn't say anything.
How about, it's true.
I'll give his daughter credit. At least she believes in something and she's willing to protest for it.
How about managing the pandemic? He's done a terrible job on that.
Too. Yeah.
And here's what's interesting about his daughter, Kira, is that here's a gentleman who's the mayor, and his job is to keep order and keep peace. And part of the way you do that is to, you have a curfew, and you say, okay, protesting peacefully is fine, but when the police say it's time to go home and disperse, you're supposed to disperse. Well, she didn't do that. And it's a bad look on this mayor. And look, as a boomer, right, and as a father, what I see is a bratty little kid, right? Because if your father is the mayor of New York, you are, as his child, in a unique position to fix all kinds of things. You could start a nonprofit. You could help people get into, with tuition vouchers, because it's all about education. You could there are so many things you could do in those communities. You could help people start businesses, but no, suddenly you've decided to wake up and now you're going to go protest. And I have to say this because of the fact that when you have parents who are connected like this, you have a responsibility to do better. And de Blasio refused to even talk about it. He wouldn't even comment about it, which is part of the problem. Go ahead.
I see her. She is her own person. Whether we think because she's de Blasio's daughter that she has some bigger standard to fill, and that she has some kind of perks. I mean, first of all, I think it's hard to give credence the idea that she could do anything in terms of uplifting these people structurally, because quite frankly, de Blasio is an inept mayor who has zero political capital across the city. He's kind of burned a lot of bridges with a lot of different communities.
Tried to run for president, couldn't even run the city. And so here's the problem. In New York City, in Soho, rioters were out of control. They were breaking into all of the really nice stores.
Yeah.
I'm just sorry. When you break into a Rolex watch store, and you just clean it out with all the Rolex watches, what does that have to do with standing together
these are those
with Mr. Floyd?
These are those opportunists we're talking about. I've seen videos of just all these people who see these protests as a vehicle to do whatever they want for their own personal satisfaction. And, this is much of the same. I've seen videos of people in California robbing surf shops because, they needed new surfboards and now's the perfect time to get them.
I'm surprised they weren't robbing the weed shops in California, Well, yeah, weed first, then surf second, probably, yeah. And then, the convenience stores. So, because it's California, okay.
Yeah, but it's a shame because now you and I have to have this conversation where we're talking about, why are these things related? And it's like,
they're not.
They shouldn't be. And
completely
people
unrelated.
Are, they're poisoning the valid movement with these kinds of activities.
They're losing the support of the vast majority of the American people who clearly see the truth. We all see what we see with the video. Of the murder. But then it's being muddled by the fact that you want to burn the American cities. That's going to solve the problem. So we have a clip about de Blasio's daughter, Kira, about her arrest, and here it is.
Mayor Bill de Blasio's daughter, Kiara, was among the 345 protesters arrested Saturday night, according to NYPD sources. Kiara de Blasio was arrested around 10:30 p.m. Saturday for unlawful assembly. The 25-year-old was one of about 100 people who refused to leave the roadway when advised to do so by police. Now, on the arrest report, de Blasio gives her address as 181 East End Avenue. That's Gracie Mansion.
Yes, so she gave Gracie Mansion, where the governor of New York lives, as her home, because that's, of course, where she lives. I'm sure that was really fun for the police when they arrested her.
Oh, boy.
And I'm just curious what he did behind the scenes. But it didn't stop there. Minnesota's governor, his daughter, her name's Hope Waltz, was tweeting out intelligence information to the violent looters and the Antifa rioters, as was Ilhan Omar's daughter, Isra Hirsi, was doing the same thing. And they were in part tweeting out the exact same list of items that the rioters and looters wanted. And here are some of the items: Band-Aids, gauze, alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, disinfectant wipes, heavy creams, goggles, plywood for shields. This is what the tweet said. And anything else useful from shielding themselves from, obviously, police officers and others. Now, that was not only the governor's daughter of Minnesota, but also Ilhan Omar's daughter. And do you see the problem here? We have a state where an incident happened, where a gentleman was murdered by a police officer while 3 other police officers stood by. And we have elected officials' children, who are basically young adults, by the way.
Yeah.
Not just in New York, but also in Minnesota. And they're encouraging rioting and looting, as if, and potentially more violence and death.
Again, I really struggle to want to say that because these children do anything that you can indict the parent, because ultimately they are their own children, and you can raise your children under a certain flag of values and hope that in the end they adhere to those values. But the second they're old and they walk out the door, they're their own person to make their own decisions. And whether we agree with their viewpoints, I would struggle to draw a link.
I think all 3 of these children, by the way, are young adults that are still living at home, just to let you know.
Right.
And it's just concerning, because it seems like there is this whole, what doesn't seem like, there is, without question, there are an entire group of people that are being raised by far left Democrat radicals who are currently in office, and their children are being encouraged, I think they're being encouraged to go out and loot, and because they hate America. And I don't understand why these people hate America so much. And they're trying to say, well, America, the entire country must fall and must be turned over because of the actions of certain people and a few people. Now, of course, in the African-American community, they're going to say, no, it's systemic. It's across all police departments. It's all police officers. It's all Americans. I got to tell you something. I find that offensive. I find it offensive, the fact that someone would come to me and say, oh, no, you got white privilege and you're right. I'm sorry. That's not true, because I didn't grow up rich. Okay. I grew up poor. So, look, we have, next up, we have Joe Biden. At the University of Pennsylvania, there's the Biden Center for Diplomacy.
Right.
Do you remember the Clinton Global Initiative?
Yeah,
it's like all this money would come in from the rest of the world, and then Clinton would have a speech through the Clinton Global Initiative, and then he would get a big check when he left the presidency. And then, or his wife did it when she was not the United States senator. So it was always passed back and forth, and they would make all this money. Well, Joe Biden, there's the Joe Biden Center for Diplomacy at the University of Pennsylvania. And the Chinese government has been funneling, the Chinese communists in particular have been funneling money to that university for years.
Through donations.
Including while he was vice president of the United States.
Can't say we're surprised.
What do you think they're buying?
Influence?
Specifically. I feel like there's something specific that they want.
Yeah, they want, some kind of legislative agenda, some kind of, foreign affairs initiatives, or insulation from the administration towards an action that they might be doing in the South China Sea. Any number of different things that the Chinese are doing. They're trying to buy, goodwill. And
here's what I think is interesting about this, is that China, the Chinese communists have gutted the heartland of America. They've gutted our industries. They've gutted manufacturing. They've
gutted, let them gut them.
And both
a lot
parties.
Of this is on our politician and our elected leaders.
And Joe Biden is right there, and he is the choice of the Democrat Party to come back and rebuild America. And one of the reasons, in my opinion, that we see all of these riots, and we have so much poverty, and we have such awful situations in America's cities, is not just because they've been one-party cities and there's no diversity of thought, but also because the cities have been gutted with good jobs that have been exported over to China, and Joe Biden has been right at the center of it. And by the way, so was Barack Obama, and as far as I'm concerned, so was the Bush administration.
Yeah.
And so was the Clinton administration. So it's both
Bush,
parties.
Reagan, all of them. This has been a long-standing, enterprise that's been steadily moving American manufacturing and productivity away from the United States. And we've been okay with a lot of their policies that, in hindsight, are just terrible. I mean, whenever you go over to China with a new business, you have to basically turn over your intellectual property. So no longer is this American company, the sole proprietor of whatever their innovation.
Sell your soul, basically.
Yeah, and the Chinese will prop up a company, and then they'll make a crappy plastic version of whatever you're making, and then they'll sell it for pennies on the dime, and undercut your American company.
So, and we have a clip on this where Joe Biden, where OAN Network is talking about the Biden Center for Diplomacy and where the money has come from, how much money has flown through, and exactly what this center does. And here is the clip.
And you look through the chart, anything over 250,000 has to be listed as the source. Here we have a donation of $14.5 million.
The oversight report finds the Chinese payments have flown into UPenn since at least 2013, on top of the aforementioned 70 million. At that time, Biden was vice president and had alleged business interests in China, including his son Hunter Biden sitting on the board of Chinese company BHR Equity Investments and receiving $1.5 billion from it. In return, the Obama administration allegedly took a softer stance on China's military presence in the South China Sea.
So that was the quid pro quo. The quid pro quo was, we're not going to challenge you in the South China Sea. So that allow you to bully all of your neighbors. And we're just going to look the other way. But thanks for the money. Hey, it was real worth it.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because how do we combat the issue in the South China Sea, irregardless? But that's a whole nother topic. But it's pretty cliche. It's pretty standard for a lot of politicians to utilize their stature in American diplomatic affairs as a means to fundraise and build up their personal wealth. And it's a slap in the face of Jeffersonian democracy and a lot of the founding fathers' principles of how government should be organized. You weren't supposed to profit off the government. You're supposed to volunteer and give your service to it. And it's one of the issues of why I think career politicians are a detrimental part of our
somebody
Congress.
who serves their entire life
time
in politics. What you're saying is they sell out at some point.
They sell out, and it was never intended to be that way. You were supposed to come, you were supposed to serve. There's a reason that
he lives.
Washington,
Joe Biden lives in a former DuPont built home that looks like it's something. Looks like it's from the Gilded Age. It's so huge.
Yeah.
How does someone who serves in government his entire
36 years making $176,000 a year?
How do they afford a mansion
it's a great
from
question.
the Gilded Age?
It's a great question.
It's just not possible.
It's on a lake. It's got a tennis court pool. Pillars, columns, the whole nine.
The aerial view is spectacular.
Yeah.
I mean, just to take care of the gardens looks to me
From
like
my
you need a
understanding, it's
full-time
the
staff.
richest. It's the biggest, richest house in Delaware.
And he's living in it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's bought and paid for it. So obvious to me.
Yeah.
So you know what? This podcast listeners, it's called The Best and Worst Among Us. And we're going to close this podcast by talking about the best among us.
Oh, boy.
And that is, I got to say it, it's Elon Musk this week.
What a guy.
It's Elon Musk because of SpaceX, whereby a private company basically took the reins of what NASA used to do years ago and privatized it into SpaceX and sent 2 astronauts to the space station, the International Space Station.
So the chief proponent, the chief opponent of space exploration in the United States over the last 20 years has just been the sheer volume of cost. Because we launch a rocket, it goes into space, we can't use the rocket anymore, and then we land.
Mm-hmm.
Each shuttle mission back in the early 2000s cost us about $20 billion.
Oof.
The Falcon 9 Dragon operation from this past weekend, $1.7 billion.
Unbelievable.
And we landed the rocket. That Falcon 9
explain what
rocket.
happened. That's
so
pretty
Elon
extraordinary.
Musk he sought out to challenge, how do we lower the cost continually year over year, mission over mission? And he realized that the biggest inhibitor was we were building these rockets, shooting them into outer space, and then nothing would happen. They would be over, and you'd have to build a whole new one.
The rest of the rocket just fell into the ocean and sank to the bottom.
So what he did is, in typical Elon Musk fashion, he just learned how to land them. So
it's a renewable rocket.
So it's a renewable rocket. He shoots it up, the capsule, disconnects and flies on its own, but then the rocket then, flies back to Earth and lands on a pad in the middle of the ocean, and then they salvage it, and then they fix it and reuse it.
It's a drone barge.
Yeah.
That it lands on, which is incredible,
and
right?
the two of them are talking, and they're continually adjusting to make sure that it's perfect landing conditions.
No one's on the barge. It's just completely automated.
Yeah,
it's
it's
incredible.
Awesome. It's also awesome to see a lot of the technological innovations. This was something that over the weekend I was watching very intensely. Like, I have not felt as much pride for anything in a long time as watching the U.S. re-enter the launching operations, and something that we hadn't been doing in 20 years.
And this is
we were paying the Russians to do, and paying foreign countries to do for us.
Which is also really sketchy.
Which is just sketchy. We're paying our adversaries to launch our astronauts into space. I mean, come on.
Elon Musk said that in the United States, we are the most entrepreneurial country, not just on Earth, but in the history of Earth.
Oh, yeah.
And he said this recently because of the success of SpaceX and the fact that they have met their mission initially. Naturally, there's a lot more to do. We have a clip on this, and this clip is about Elon talking post-success of SpaceX. And here is the clip.
This is hopefully the first step on a journey towards a civilization on Mars, life becoming multiplanetary, based on the moon, and expanding beyond Earth, and life becoming a multi-planet species, life becoming multiplanetary for the first time in the 4.5 billion year history of Earth. I think this is hopefully the first step on that journey. It will require a tremendous amount of innovation.
So that's Elon Musk with the classic Elon Musk, by the way,
yes.
with his
vision.
His vision. His vision is that human beings are going to push beyond Earth, not just for exploration, but to actually habitate, to find new habitats.
Space.
In space somewhere. In his case, he's saying a space station in Mars or on Mars,
frontier.
Whatever the case. The final frontier. Having a rough time here. It's pretty cool. And then he also talked right after that, Garrick. He talked about, and I'm hoping that your generation is inspired from Elon Musk. He also talked about the fact that he created Tesla, and he also created Solar City, and all the battery technologies. He did that because he says he wants to save the planet.
Yeah.
But he said he created SpaceX because if the planet isn't saved,
we got to get out of here.
He wants the people to have a place to go to where they can have, where it can be sustainable. This is according to Musk, and I think it's pretty spectacular thinking because the guy's obviously way out there.
He is awesome. He is probably my favorite American, just in his ability to...
Originally born in South Africa.
South Africa, holds triple citizenship between the United States, Canada, and South Africa. Probably one of the best entrepreneurs in terms of just seeing things that need to be addressed and thinking outside the box to innovate. And innovation is, we talk about it incessantly on the show. I think, we're beating a dead horse at this point, but he has taken our vision for innovation and run with it wildly. The ability to, how are we going to address, space exploration in the United States? Well, it's cost prohibitive. Let's make it cost effective. Let's make it cheap and reusable. And, here he is, and he's accomplished it. And it is really awesome to see what humanity can do when we're on the same team and we're all vying for the same mission, and
we have a goal. We have
a goal and a common goal,
common values.
And we can exceed the expectations of this planet. We can break out of the confines of this spinning ball of life here and become truly interstellar. And
that would be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be so neat. And the thing is as we said before, the podcast is about the best and the worst among us. And as you know, the worst among us this week, of course, were the police officers that committed murder on camera. And the best among us, of course, are naturally, we got Elon Musk, who's showing us what is possible and the fact that there's something far greater than us that's out there.
Yeah.
And we should reach for the stars for that reason. And we should do so because there's so much more to explore. There's so much more to see. And if only we could get, quite frankly, leadership to be able to talk about that, and I agree with you, to be able to, if they talked about that this week, about the dichotomy of SpaceX versus what happened in Minneapolis and how we must become one nation again, as you just said, I thought it was really well said, especially for a millennial. Any more comments on this?
Mark,
Last
I couldn't
comment.
have said it any better. I think those are the final words.
And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross. And of course, Adam Couture, our producer, and our assistant producer and millennial, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and our website. See you next time.